Welcome. I am TH, a certified flight instructor. For pilots taking this lesson to take their skills and career to the next level, prepare for an exhaustive, master-level explainer. Today, we're tearing down the bedrock of aircraft identity, Title 14 of the Code of Federal Regulations, Part 45. Now, you might be thinking this is just dry administrative paperwork. Actually, scratch that. This is the literal DNA of every single aircraft, engine, and critical component that takes to the skies. It's what separates airworthy hardware from scrap metal.
Here is our flight plan for today. We'll be systematically working through 6 key areas: applicability of Part 45, marking products and articles, required identification data rules, standards for PMA, TSO, and critical parts, nationality and registration marks, and we'll wrap up with the strict mark sizing and location rules.
At its core, this regulation dictates the exact anatomy that proves your aircraft is legally airworthy and globally recognized. We are going to examine the uncompromising standards of exactly how, where, and why we identify and register our equipment. So, let's get right into it.
All right, Section 1, Applicability of Part 45. Let's establish exactly what falls under the jurisdiction of these regulations. So, under Subpart A, Section 45.1 lays down a very clear framework for us. This part is strictly about 2 primary things. First, it covers the physical marking of products and articles manufactured under a type certificate, a Part 21 production approval, or through international bilateral agreements for the acceptance of products. Second, it dictates the nationality and registration marking of all U.S. registered aircraft. Basically, if you're flying it, if you're building it, or if you're installing an approved part on it, Part 45 dictates exactly how it proves its identity to the world. It's the absolute foundation of traceability.
Moving right along to Section 2, Marking Products and Articles. This is where we transition from the overarching law down to the physical hardware itself.
Let's talk about Section 45.11, which outlines the Fireproof Identification Plate requirements. And listen, these aren't just decorative stickers. They must be secured so they absolutely will not be defaced during normal service or lost in an accident. That survivability is key. For your aircraft, this plate lives on the exterior fuselage so it's fully legible to someone on the ground. Usually you'll find it adjacent to the rearmost entrance door or back near the tail. Engines demand their own accessible fireproof plate, while propellers, blades, and hubs must be marked using approved fireproof methods, but specifically on a non-critical surface so we don't introduce stress risers. And for you balloon pilots joining us, the plate goes directly on the envelope, with additional permanent markings required on the basket and the heater assembly.
Now, aviation obviously has a long, rich history, and the FAA accounts for that with some specific exceptions in Section 45.11. Aircraft manufactured before March 7, 1988, they can secure their ID plate at an accessible exterior or interior location near an entrance, but only provided the model designation and builder's serial number are still displayed on the exterior fuselage. Powered parachutes and weight shift control aircraft just need it on the exterior fuselage. Gliders, you'll note, are completely exempt from the standard exterior placement rules. Furthermore, if an aircraft is built for Part 121 operations, commuter ops, or for export, they're permitted to have the plate secured at an accessible location near an entrance. So it's not quite one size fits all, but the intent remains the same.
Section 3, Required Identification Data Rules. We know exactly where the plates go. Now, what exactly needs to be stamped onto them?
Under Section 45.13, Paragraph A, the identification data is what builds the unshakable pedigree of the component. It's the birth certificate. The required information includes the builder's name, the specific model designation, and the builder's serial number. It also demands the type and production certificate numbers if they apply, along with the established rating specifically for aircraft engines. This data is absolutely crucial. It forms an unbroken chain of accountability from the factory floor through every overhaul, all the way to the flight line.
Now, for engines manufactured on or after January 1st, 1984, there is an entirely additional layer of compliance we have to track: exhaust emissions under Part 34. You're going to encounter a few specific FAA designations here. Comply means exactly what you think. It fully meets emission standards. Exempt means an exemption was granted, and you as the pilot or mechanic will need to find the specific reason in the permanent power plant record. Non-US is a massive one for us to watch out for. If you see that, it means the engine is exempt, but the aircraft absolutely, under no circumstances, may be operated within the United States. Finally, exempt new and accepted spare apply to very specific post-2012 exemptions.
And here is the absolute hard line: tampering prohibitions. Section 45.13 dictates that no person may remove, change, or place identification information without direct FAA approval. It's highly illegal. The one and only exception is for authorized personnel performing maintenance under Part 43, who can temporarily remove a plate when it's necessary during maintenance ops. But make no mistake, gentlemen, that exact plate must go back on the exact aircraft, engine, or propeller from which it was removed. No swapping, no substitutions, zero tolerance.
Moving to Section 4, PMA, TSO, and critical parts. Let's shift our focus to the standards for aftermarket and highly stressed components.
Sections 45.15 and 45.116 mandate incredibly strict tracking for these parts. A parts manufacturer approval or PMA article must permanently display FAA-PMA right along with the holder's name and part number. A technical standard order or TSO article needs the specific TSO number, the designation letter, and either the serial number or date of manufacture. Now, critical parts, those are the ones with mandatory replacement times or strict inspection intervals, they demand a unique serial number to track their life cycle flawlessly. And for life-limited parts, if they are physically too small or if engraving them would compromise their structural integrity, the design approval holder has to provide alternate marking instructions or attach the vital info directly to the container.
Section 5, Nationality and Registration Marks. This brings us to Subpart C, the exterior painted marks that announce your aircraft's identity to the entire world.
Sections 45.21 and 45.23 set an unyielding standard. These marks must be painted or affixed with similar permanence. There is absolutely zero room for artistic interpretation here. No fancy ornamentation, they must contrast sharply with the background, and they must be perfectly legible from a distance. In the US, it always begins with the Roman capital letter N, denoting our nationality, followed by the registration number. Any suffixes must also be Roman capitals, and if you're operating a limited, restricted, light sport, experimental, or provisionally certificated aircraft, you carry an additional burden. You must display that specific category word near each entrance in letters between 2 and 6 inches high.
Now, Section 45.22 does carve out some fascinating special rules for exhibition and antique aircraft. If you're flying an aircraft for an air show or a movie production, you can actually operate without standard marks at the exhibition location, provided you have prior FSDO approval or an appropriate flight plan. Furthermore, small aircraft built at least 30 years ago, or their experimental replicas, can legally use tiny 2-inch end marks. But listen closely, fellow aviators. These historical exemptions vanish in an instant the second you penetrate an Air Defense Identification Zone, an ADIZ, or a DWIZ, a Distant Early Warning Identification Zone. National security immediately trumps historical aesthetics, and you must display full 12-inch compliant marks in those airspaces, no exceptions. Finally, Section 6, Mark Sizing and Location Rules. The FAA treats the placement of these marks as a strict, non-negotiable geometric science. Let's compare the locations based on aircraft architecture. For fixed-wing aircraft under Section 45.25, you really have two choices: horizontally on both surfaces of the vertical tail, or horizontally on both sides of the fuselage between the trailing edge of the wing and the leading edge of the horizontal stabilizer. For non-fixed-wing aircraft under Section 45.27, it varies. Rotorcraft display marks horizontally on the cabin, fuselage, boom, or tail. Airships most place them on the upper right and lower left horizontal stabilizers, and on the bottom half of the vertical stabilizer. Spherical balloons display them diametrically opposite at the maximum horizontal circumference, while powered parachutes place them visibly on a structural member. The shape dictates the placement.
Marching systematically into Section 45.29, we find the exact height requirements. For standard fixed-wing aircraft and rotorcraft, your marks must be at least 12 inches high. Gliders, airships, balloons, powered parachutes, and weight shift control aircraft have a lower threshold, requiring marks at least 3 inches high. However, tying right back to operational readiness and national security we just talked about, no matter what you are flying, if you penetrate an ADZ or DWIZ, your aircraft must temporarily or permanently display nationality and registration marks that are at least 12 inches high. Intercepting fighters need to be able to read your tail.
So let's see how all this builds into the exact anatomy of an end number. Like I said, the math here is a strict science. Step 1, the height sets the entire scale for everything else. Step 2, the width of the characters must be exactly 2/3 of their height. The only exceptions are the number 1, which is much narrower at 1/6 the height, and the letters M and W, which may be full width. Step 3, the thickness of the solid lines forming the letters must be 1/6 of the character's height. Step 4, the spacing between each character must be at least 1/4 of the character width. Finally, these marks must maintain perfect uniformity on both sides of the aircraft. Before we wrap up, we must touch on Section 4531 regarding export aircraft. If an aircraft is manufactured right here in the United States for delivery outside the country, it may legally display the marks required by the foreign state of registry. However, an aircraft marked this way is strictly prohibited from operating within the United States. The sole, very limited exceptions are for necessary test and demonstration flights or direct transit to the purchaser. Otherwise, it stays on the ground.
And that brings us to a final critical scenario under Section 45.33. When a U.S. registered aircraft is sold, what must happen to those U.S. marks if the purchaser is not a U.S. citizen, not a permanent resident, or not an eligible U.S. corporation? Well, the holder of the Certificate of Aircraft Registration is legally obligated to completely remove all United States marks from that aircraft before delivery. Literally, peel the paint off. The N number stays with the nation unless the new owner is legally entitled to it. Think about the rigor of that rule next time you walk the flight line. Identity in aviation isn't just paint and metal plates, it is a profound legal responsibility. Take these standards back to the hangar and the cockpit and continue flying with the utmost professionalism. See you in the skies.